How's it going on, guys and girls? My name's Graham and this is Burnt Aquila Painting. This week I've been thinking a lot about my terrain collection. I have a lot of it, lots of bits and bobs that I've collected over the years. But the main problem I have is that it's not all built and painted. In fact, a lot of it's not at all. I'm looking at it right now. Don't get me wrong, some of it is built and painted to a standard that I can use it on the tabletop, but it is half painted. But I own probably about 2 tables worth, and a lot of it's still on sprues. I easily could field a good sized table and probably a little bit more, and then I have a whole table's worth of towel terrain. I know, I'm sorry. At my friend Matt's house. So I do have a reasonable sized collection of terrain. So I've made it my mission in 2025 to build and paint all of it, so I can have a great table of either Warhammer, necromunda, or whatever I'm playing. Those of you who follow along on my Instagram or YouTube for a little while now will know that I like big, bold colours. And just because it's a ruined building, it doesn't mean it can't pop, right? It's going to be a bit of a long video series that I'll catch you up on every so often. But in this video, I'm going to be painting the thermic plasma regulators. I'd look at my camera then. These ones. Now, most of you are here because you saw the title or the thumbnail, and it's about rusty painting. Now, the way I do rust is with 4 paints. Well, 2 paints, and then I do verdigris with another 2. And eventually, all of my Sector Mechanica stuff will have this same look. But today, we're going to focus on the body and the shell of the plasma generators themselves, so I can focus on the plasma and that effect in another video. So let's get cracking. So I bought these plasma generators from eBay and already built and already primed. They were missing a couple of the barricades, but apart from that they were there already primed. So I start with the dry brush all over them with my lead belcher. This first one is quite a heavy dry brush. I only want the deepest recesses not to have this paint. So it gives a good coat of lead belcher all over, but still gives it a little bit of texture through the dry brushing. Any areas that are a bit streaky, I go over again with the same colour in a different direction. So if you're ever having trouble with the dry brushing, a little bit more dry brushing over the top in a different direction to the streaks, and it should kind of help them to disappear. Top tip. Next, I did a overall wash with, you guessed it, our favourite null oil. But I also did something a little bit different. I didn't want it just to be one flat wash colour. So while the null oil was still wet, I actually added a little bit of the Draconov Nightshade, the blue wash as well. With my big flat dry brush, I stippled that in random places, and just as both washes start to dry, I kind of stipple them around a little bit just to break it up so it doesn't pool for 1, and 2, just to give it a little bit more texture. And I stipple that all over the place. Try to be a little bit more random with this. Don't worry too much where it's going, because 90% of it's probably going to be covered up with the other colours and other textures and effects that we're going to be adding on top. But if there is an area of just the washed lead belcher showing, that this will help to break up that flat black tone. Once I was happy, I set that aside to dry. Once that was set aside and dried, I did my next layer of steel colours, and for this I used the Canoptic Alloy. I went for Canoptic Alloy because it's a slightly different tone to the lead belcher. Lead belcher has a more of a grey scale from black to white, but the Canoptic Alloy has a warmer tone to it. It's almost got a slightly brassy hue, but still very much a silver or a steel colour. I really like this as a mid-tone for my steels and things like that, especially when I'm looking for a more tarnished kind of look. I put this all over the terrain piece, but with a slightly lighter dry brush than before with the lead belcher. I want most of it to be covered, but I still want some of those other colours we've already established to show through in the slightly more deeper recesses. If I want any areas to be a little bit more kind of established or a little bit more texture, I do a little bit more of a stippling motion instead of the actual brushing motion. This will give this layer of paint a little bit more texture and just a little bit more va-va-voom when you look at it. What advert was that? If you remember what advert that va-va-voom was with back in the early noughties, let me know in the comments. I think it's got a footballer in it. I think it's Mazda. Once that was done, I did my very last dry brush. Now this is a very light dry brush of Stormhost Silver. I specifically did a downward stroke on the brushing with this one because I wanted to hit the top facing edges to simulate light hitting the top edges but not the underneath. I actually don't think this step is actually necessary, as it didn't really show up too well on this piece. I think I did a little bit too light a dry brush, to be fair. On any flat surfaces like the domed top, I also did a little bit more of a stippling motion as well as a dry brushing motion. Just like the layer before, just to give it a little bit more texture and a little bit more character than just a flat tone. Using these steel colours with slightly different hues and 2 different washes in this part, I feel like it really gives a good tarnished and old worn looking steel without having it completely rusty yet. And using a dry brushing and stippling technique, it really gives that little bit more something to the metal instead of just a flat tone. If you give this a go yourself, let me know how you get on and let me know your thoughts in the comments. So now we have our base to work up from. We're going to block in a few of the different detail elements before we move on. That's any pipes, any cables, any flexi copex, skulls and different things like that. The first thing I do is block in all of the copper or brass sections with Barahoth. I don't know what gold? This one. Balthazar gold. The first thing I do is block in any copper or brass sections with I've literally just looked at it. Balthazar. Keep that on my table so I know what the fuck I'm talking about. The first thing I do is block in any sections I want to be copper or brass with a Balthazar gold. This is a really dark, coppery kind of looking colour, and I find it's a really good base for any colours like that. Read my notes, helps. Next I went over with streaking grime just to add a little bit of that kind of dark greyish dirt running down the areas and building up in nooks and crannies. I did this with just splashing this in areas where I felt dirt and grime would build up, but actually looking back now, I don't think you really need to do this part. I've only done it on one of my plasma generators. I'm not going to do it on the other because I think it's unnecessary and just eats up too much time, and I don't think it adds to the overall look of the piece once it's finished. Next thing to do is block in anywhere I'm going to use contrast paint with a white, and I used bright titanium white from Pro Acryl with a couple of layers just to make sure that it's got that full opacity so the contrast paint can do its job properly and it doesn't look all smeary afterwards, because that sucks. The parts I painted here were the conduit, any cables, any skulls, dials or screens. I wasn't too worried about where I got the contrast paints on the cables, so there's like loads of these metal straps over the conduit and things like that holding it together. The reason why I wasn't too worried is because I was going to go back in with an acrylic pen from AK. I'm using dark aluminium in this video. If you've seen my last video when I did the necromunda diorama, you know how much I absolutely love this stuff. It speeds up painting my metallics. Most of the time you only need one coat and it flows off the pen really easily. The only downfall is that you can't get into really hard to reach areas and things like that, so it's only really good for big open areas or details you can get to, like these. Once those are all blocked in, I take a Agrax Earthshade wash and wash it all over. Now the one mistake I did with this is that I didn't use my gloss Agrax Earthshade, I used the normal one and it came out really matte. If you're painting true metallics and want to keep that shine, I recommend using a gloss wash from Citadel. The Null Oil and the Drakenhof Nightshade doesn't really matter too much because they have like a satin sheen, but the Agrax Earthshade does come out really matte. I didn't want the steel colours to look worn and tattered and then the bronze to look uniform and almost clean. And I thought a medium gold colour stippled with a little bit of sponge would look really good to break up that flat tone. All you do is take your partner or your mum's kitchen sponge, rip a bit off, she won't mind, trust me. Dip that in your chosen paint, wick it off on some paper towel until you stop having like big single splotches of paint and it's more sparse and sporadic, and just lightly tap that on the areas you want it to be chipped. Got to be careful not to get it onto the steel colours, but if you have a paintbrush with a little bit of water ready, you can wick that off real quick if you do hit those areas by mistake. Now it is time to add your rust effects. Now at the beginning of the video I said you can do this with 4 paints and I was not kidding. Let me tell you how. All you need to do the rust is dirty down rust and some water, and Rizza rust and some water. That is it. Now I know that most of you have heard from both of these products before, they've been used widely, but let me show you how I do it to get some really cool broken up rusty textures with just a bit of water, and then go in later with a little bit of Rizza rust and make them pop. Now with dirty down rust, I've seen people say to warm it up before use, warm the area you're going to paint over. I've tried that and not really found a difference, to be fair. Now let me know if you found it different when you've used it before, if you have, in the comments, because this is something I'm still kind of like using and learning, trying to the best way to get different results with. But the best way I've found to use it so far is to splotch in areas where rust would naturally build up, under creases where water would gather over time and create rust, things like that, and splotch it in relatively thick. Now with dirty down rust, once it's dry, you can go back in with a bit of water and reactivate it, and that's what we're going to be doing here. This is the trick, this is the key to what I'm doing here. So once your dirty down is all over your miniature, in areas that rust will build up, it's going to look rubbish. Trust me. You might look at it and go, that's awful, this isn't going to work, I've ruined it, strip it, start again. Don't do that. This is what it's meant to look. Trust the process and we're going to get a great result. All you need is an old paintbrush and some water. So take your brush, get it wet and just wick away a little bit and just smooth out the edges of the dirty down rust, where it's pure dirty down rust, hard edge, and then the steel colour underneath which we've already painted. You want to kind of almost stipple and prod the edges of those bits, and once that dirty down rust is activated again, you'll see it starts to smudge and smear and start to soften those edges. So just feather those edges out and it looks really nice. Another benefit of having the dirty down rust now in your bristles is that you can go around to the areas that you didn't put any in and start to change the hue of some of the steel colours, so it looks like it's very slightly rusty in areas, or it's just starting to turn rusty, and just generally building up those effects with streaks and stipples. They're the two main techniques in this whole video, streaks and stipples. Just go over the whole piece, doing this slowly in each area until you're happy with the look. Now the one thing you'll find, which I absolutely love about dirty down rust, while you're doing this, especially with the stippling motion, it starts to bunch up the dirty down rust in areas of the tips of the brush. This kind of build up in areas of the dirty down rust, and then a thinning with the water in others while you're doing the single stippling motion. That also creates a really nice kind of natural edge of the thicker parts, whilst still having that kind of smoother gradient of colour from the normal steel to the dirty down rusty bits as well, but all in one. I took a picture put it on my Instagram on the day when I did this step, and this step was just dirty down rust, and you can leave it there. But if you want to elevate your rust to the next level, once you've done that, you're going to want one more paint, and that is RZA Rust from GW. And this stuff is orange! Now you may notice that this RZA Rust is actually a dry paint for dry brushing. We're not going to use it like that at all. The thing I love about RZA Rust is that you can thin it down to a wash consistency, and when it dries really, really matte. So you can use that to give massive punches of colour to your rust areas. And in my opinion, it just looks fantastic. So I go around all the areas that I want to have a little bit more punch of colour, and in the areas of rust I've already painted with the dirty down rust, I add splotches of this RZA Rust wash. I streak it down in creases and recesses, like rust has built up in those areas, anywhere where you think water would run in the rain. This is because if water runs down there constantly and it's on bare metal, it's going to rust in those areas. So in cracks, crevices, round rivets, bolts, things like that. If you are going to paint it over your dirty down rusted areas as well, just make sure a little bit of the dirty down rust is showing around the edges, a bit like a chipping technique. This will give you a really nice kind of change in tone and still look really rusty. Honestly, these two paints in conjunction with each other really make a rusty thing look just really rusty, and it's so simple to use. It's just two paints, a little bit of water, and the only real techniques I've been using in this whole video is stippling, dry brushing, and well, washing the recesses, if you want to call that a technique, and that's it. Just make sure you're aware of where you're putting your paints and is it in a good place that rust would realistically build up, and you'll get a great effect. But not all metals go rusty, like all the copper and bronze sections we painted earlier. Some of those metals actually oxidize in the oxygen, believe it or not. And what happens when those metals oxidize is they change colour completely. And this is something that we call verdigris, or verdigris if you're uncultured heathen. This happens primarily to copper. I'm not a scientist, so if this isn't 100% accurate or it happens for a different reason, let me know in the comments. But to my knowledge, this happens primarily to copper. And while it oxidizes, it gives off this really nice bluey turquoise kind of green colour. And that is what we're going to paint next, again with only 2 colours. And I'm not using the Verdigris colour from Dirty Down. I'm actually going to be using the turquoise colour from Vallejo Game Colour. This colour is one of my favourite colours. It's so vibrant and the pigment of the colour is so thick. You have to really thin it down before it gets translucent. It is a powerhouse of a colour. But what we're going to do is basically do the exact same thing as we did with the rust. But obviously it can't reactivate with just water. You have to be quite quick with this one before the acrylic paint dries. So in small areas around where we've painted our copper and brass colours, I'm going to be adding a little bit of streaks and splotches of the turquoise colour. Now, this might be a slightly darker colour than what you would naturally think about verdigris in the real world. But don't worry, we're going to be adding another colour afterwards to give it a little bit more brightness, a little bit more pop. And because of those 2 colours in conjunction with each other, just like the rust, it'll make the verdigris look really punchy. So as I said, in streaks and splotches around where it would naturally build up, around those copper and brass kind of colours we painted earlier. I've thinned this down to almost a wash consistency, and I'm not too worried if the lines between this colour and the previous colours are quite harsh. Just make sure it's not in massive areas or you sneeze when you're painting and splotch it on there. That'd be bad. Depending on how old you want it to look, add more or less of this verdigris technique. I want mine to look pretty old, so I'm adding it around rivets, bolts, underneath like edges, streaking it down the steel work like it's ran down in the rain. Anywhere I think it would naturally drip or streak. Now the very last colour I used to finish off our rusty verdigris piece of terrain is actually a specific oxide paint from GW. Nilic oxide, I believe it's called. Nilic oxide. Just like the Rizza Rust, this dries really matte, which is great for what we want. But also if we thin it down with a little bit of paint or medium, we can get it to streak just like the Rizza Rust and put it all in the crevices of where we want it to be. This will build up that even lighter blue colour and add that punch that we've already started with a turquoise before. I'm a really big fan of this 2-tone kind of 2 different colour technique, and I really do think that all you need to have for this kind of look is 4 colours. Another reason why I actually love this 4 paint technique is because the 2 paints are so different and are on totally different sides of the colour wheel. They just make each other pop and they complement each other so well. If you think differently, let me know in the comments and different techniques and different paints that you would use. But for gaming terrain, which these pieces are, to paint them to this standard, I don't think you need to do any more. And to be honest, I think it's far better than any of the quality of terrain that you're going to find in gaming tournaments or anything like that. Obviously, if you disagree, let me know in the comments as to what you think. But I'm really happy with the outcome of this piece. I'm super excited to get on those details and get them finished and to start on that plasma glow. But that is going to be in a different video. As for now, my name's Graham, this has been Burnt Aquila Painting, and thanks very much for watching. Peace! Thanks for watching Burnt Aquila Painting. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like that from myself, then subscribe to the channel. I also have a Patreon and an Instagram, a TikTok, all the socials you'll find in the description below. I do painting videos, a couple of gaming videos, but mostly about our crafting side of the hobby. So if you enjoy them and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Have a great one, guys.